Hey everyone, welcome to another stream. I'm super excited to have another guest this week. As you all know, I have this weekly streams with different people in the industry talking about different topics around, JavaScript tech and the web in general. And with me here, I have Dan Moore. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm head of DevRel at a company called FusionAuth. I've been a dev for about 20 years and played a bunch of different roles, but right now I help educate developers about authentication, authorization, user management, and I'm super thrilled to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, interesting because that's what we're talking about, right? Authentication, identity, and OAuth. For folks that are not familiar with these terms, would you like to give us a brief explanation what those are?
Yeah. So let me kind of start with um, identity in general, which is basically just knowing who someone is. And
Mm-hmm.
you can think about it both in the offline context and the online context. Obviously, online is probably more interesting to your viewers, but it's always helpful for me to realize that like a driver's license or a government ID card or a student ID card are all forms of identification. Um, Authentication is proving somebody is who they are. And again, you have an offline and online analog. Online, it usually is username, password, but there's a lot of other options as well. But it really is about confirming that the person who is presenting whatever they're presenting is who they say they are, right? Like I give a government worker my ID, or I give a system my username and password. Then there's authorization, which is often following after authentication, although it doesn't always have to. And authorization is what can this person do, or what can this entity do? So if you think about a blog, some people can write posts and publish them. Some people can only view them. Some people might be able to edit them, but not publish them. So you have these
Mm-hmm.
different tiers, which is one major form of authorization. That's called RBAC, or role-based access control. There's
Yeah.
other forms too, but RBAC is pretty common and pretty applicable in a lot of scenarios. User management tends to follow along with those other two because it's basically a CRUD or CRUDL for users, right? Create, update, read. I have those out of order. Sorry, delete and list
Delete. Yeah.
for users, because and also sometimes some affiliated things like groups of users or roles, or the entities to which users have access. Those can kind of all get wrapped into user management. But the important thing to realize is that there are three different functions, even though they tend to be kind of brought together often. Is that kind of giving you a good
Yeah.
start? Okay.
That's a very nice way of explaining it actually. And I like how you layered it up from identity up to
Great.
user management. I was also going to ask you like the differences, but you already explained it. Authorization, authentication, are they similar things or the same? Do you need one over another? But you already did justice to that. Um, Now, I would like for you to like share more about these topics, right? We've gone over what they are. If you um, personally, as a developer, I've done integrations with authentication into different applications. I know that there are different ways to do it, right?
Mhm.
There's no one way. There's doing the email password routes, logging with Facebook, Google, and all of that.
Sure.
Um, I'm not sure the direction you want to go here, but if you like to talk more about the implementation details of how to go about adding authentication to an application, we can
Yeah.
take, yeah.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I have some slides and we can kind of jump into those, but I think that the first thing you need to determine is whether you need authentication at all, right? There are some
Mm,
applications, or more likely websites, that just don't need it. And if you can get away with not needing it, good on you, right? That's the
yeah.
first thing, right? Like, don't introduce complexity you don't have to. Then, if you want determine that actually, different users are going to have different permissions, then you want to think about three options. The first is write your own. The second
Mm-hmm.
is use like an open source library or something that is embedded into a framework or an application that you're building. And the third is a standalone server that handles authentication. Something like FusionAuth, although again, this is not an ad for FusionAuth, there are plenty of other options out there. They all share the virtue of being kind of a separate system. So the first thing I'd say is rolling your own is a great academic exercise. It's a horrible idea if it's going to be in production. I've done it 20 years ago, and it's not, how do I put this? It seems easy to just say, oh, I'm going to have a username field and a password field. But as you dig into it, it starts to get harder and harder because for a number of reasons. First is this is typically not a core competency of you, right? Second is there's a lot of edge cases. And then third, this is very valuable information. And there's a lot of passwords that get stolen. If your users haven't heard of Have I Been Pwned?
I have.
Yep.
I have. I can also put it in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be a good one to put in the chat. And that's just a way, like basically this Australian, I think, Troy Hunt, has gathered this corpus of, I think, 1 billion or 2 billion or some vast number of passwords that have been compromised. And so he's gotten to the point now where people will actually send, if they find other password breach dumps, they'll send him the information and he puts in the corpus and makes it available for you to see whether your passwords have been compromised. And he does it in a secure way. It's not like he's storing a bunch of plain text passwords. But so the upshot is doing it yourself is in general a bad idea. Now, the good part about that is there's a lot of options, right? There's, I don't know, I'm not as familiar with the JavaScript ecosystem, but Rails has a library, Django has a library, Java has multiple libraries. I know JavaScript has some, like
JavaScript,
Passport,
so
JS.
if you're doing, for example, you mentioned doing with standalone services. I know that with Auth0, for example, you can use their JavaScript library to add into, I think there are tons of them. There's also like I'm forgetting their names, open source ones that you can also use. There are different routes to take. Actually, it's good that we are talking about like from doing it yourself. And I know that doing it myself, like a few years ago, implications also that comes to mind is security. How secure is that implementation that you're going with. And now I've even seen it become a trend that people don't usually do the route of username password, but now they do like login with GitHub or something, or get a login code. That's just what I've seen.
Okay. Well, I'd love to talk about those topics, but real briefly, the security thing, it's not just, are you going to be secure when you implement it, which is a hard enough task itself. It's also, are you going to be secure in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 2 years when your application's progressed, and you need to still keep making sure that your login functionality is secure. So just another thing to say, I think rolling your own is a really bad idea in production. So briefly, real quick on the standalone versus integrated, the pattern we've seen is if you have kind of one application, doing it integrated makes a ton of sense because it's easier to deploy. It's kind of bound into your application. If you're using a tool like Devise is one that I know of in Rails, it's just right in there, right? It's super easy to get going. Where it starts to make sense to pull it out to a standalone auth server like Auth0 or FusionAuth is when you have multiple applications, and you want to start to have this single store of user data, this silo of user data that multiple applications can all authenticate against, and have different applications will have different roles and different users even, but some users might span across applications.
Okay, that makes sense.
So do you want to talk about social sign-on and magic links and stuff like that, or
everything? Sure.
Sure. So as you mentioned, Gift, there's username and password is becoming more passé. It's still very prevalent, but I think that a lot of people have realized, in part because of those breaches, that they don't trust every random website with their credentials. And you
Yeah.
can work around that with the password manager to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives everybody a unique password, but lots of people want to delegate the authentication piece. And by the way, companies are happy to do this too, to a GitHub or a Google or a Facebook. And that is something that, again, third-party providers can help with. You can also do the implementation yourself. And I know there are open source libraries out there that can help you with that as well. That's really great. I think the things you want to think about in that situation are, what are my users going to be doing, right? Or who are my users, right? I would not, if I was building a developer focused website, I probably wouldn't make login with Facebook a high priority. Whereas if I was building a consumer focused website, I would make login with GitHub a priority.
Yeah.
So you want to think about that. The other thing you want to think about is, as a user, I've heard horror stories where you tie everything to that one account and then you lose access to that account. I think the trade-offs in general are better to have everything tied to Google, because it's easier to turn on MFA. It's easier, the Google security folks are probably going to be more attentive to your, external security threats than random website ABC.
Yeah.
So it's just a trade-off you want to be thinking about. Which points to another thing is, whichever accounts you have, if you can turn on 2FA, which basically, let's take a step back.
Yeah. 2FA, what's that?
Yeah. So let's talk about factors. Factors of authentication are a fancy way of saying, remember, authentication is about proving I am Dan Moore, or you are Gift, right? Like, that's authentication. Factors are methods. It's a fancy word for method of authentication. I don't know why they came up with the word factor, but everyone uses it, so I'm going to use it. So 2FA, or multi-factor authentication, basically means you don't present just one proof, one method of who you are. You present two or more.
Okay.
And kind of the canonical four general categories of factors are what you know, right? So that's a username and password or some secret information about you. Your second grade teacher. Your what you have. So that would be, a phone or a hardware piece of information. Who you are. So this is biometric, right? Like a retinal scan or a fingerprint, touch ID, face ID. And then the last one, which is less often used, is where you are. So those are the general categories. There are different strengths and trade-offs with each of those. But two-factor basically means you're saying to the website, hey, I'm going to register additional factor of authentication, and then I'm going to provide both of those when I log in. And lots of websites do it kind of the first time they see you, and then maybe they'll do it periodically. Or if it's high security website like a bank or something, they might do it every time. Some people we've seen do it in something called step-up auth, where they basically say, okay, you're logged in. Let's say you're logged into a blog, and you can view stuff and edit stuff all the time. But as soon as you go to publish it, which is a higher risk operation, then they require that second factor to make sure that you really are who you say you are. Blog is probably a bad example. Banking is a better example, right?
Banking, yeah.
But yeah, so that's 2FA. And as a user and as a user, turn it on as many places as you can. As a developer, make it available as many places as you can, right? Because, well, let me rephrase that. I think you want to make it available where appropriate. If I was doing a website just to share recipes, I probably wouldn't turn on 2FA. But lots of people who are watching your stream are building applications where people really care about their data, and you don't want someone's account to be taken over. So offering 2FA is a great way to help prevent that.
Nice. Great. Honestly, I feel like, yes, it's something that I find that is really important, even as a user myself, right? If I'm logged out of, for example, Google, I want to make sure that nobody can hack into because they need to have my phone or something else to sign in, So it's really important.
Yep. Yeah. Especially, that's a really good point, especially for those kind of critical accounts, right? Anything to do with finance, anything to do with email. Because, by the way, any email is like this like gatekeeper to the rest of your accounts, because most forgot passwords for
Yeah.
back password flows say, hey, enter your email address. They send a link, and then that lets them get access to that account.
Mm-hmm.
So protect those high value accounts for sure as a user.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds great. This is shaping up to be very informative. I am interested in, now that we've talked a bit about two-factor authentication, we should probably talk more about OAuth, which is the last bit of this entire topic we want to delve into. So OAuth, what's that, and all that?
Sure. Yeah. So I might take a little step back and say, in the early 2000s, people were trying to solve this problem, right? They knew that people wanted to log in to other websites. They often knew that people wanted to grant other websites access to their data. Sorry, there's a lot of pieces here. So I might have, Dan might want to grant, suppose that someone's building a reminder application, and I want to, as a user of that application, give them access to my Google Calendar so that they can like read it automatically and like send me reminders about it. Well, I could give that reminder application my username and password for Google, which is a horrible idea. But that's what people were doing in the 2000s, because there wasn't any other way for that reminder application to get access to Google Calendar, private information from Google Calendar. So OAuth was created to solve that problem. There was a first version that came out in, I believe, 2010, and it had some complexities. The only real player who's still using that right now is Twitter. And then there's OAuth 2, which came out in 2012 and has been revised over the years. And what OAuth 2 basically, the problem it solves is secure delegated access. So it basically says, it's a protocol that says, hey, Dan, you want to give the reminder application read-only access to the calendar and nothing else with the Google account. So how can we make that happen? And what ends up happening is I log into Google. Well, sorry, the reminder application says, hey, I want access to Google, and click a button here. I click a button. It sends me to Google. Google says, hey, reminder app wants access to Google Calendar. It wants these permissions. Do you accept or deny? If I accept it, it sends me back to the reminder application through some redirects to my browser, and then the reminder application gets, it's not, the end result is the reminder application gets a token, and that token is basically a credential. It's basically like a factor of authentication, but it's time bound and it's limited. Right. So it's limited to the Google, it's limited to Google. First of all, it's limited to Google Calendar. It's limited to me, and it's limited to like the permissions I've given. And it's also limited to a certain duration of time. And so that's the problem that OAuth was really designed to solve.
Okay, that makes sense. Is that what you just explained, access token then? Or because I know that there's a concept of access token, refresh tokens, when you is that what it is then? The ones that get expired and then I'm not really sure the differences, so I'm just asking. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So there's three main kinds of tokens in the OAuth world. There's access tokens, which is kind of going through the flow that I just outlined, and it's easier. It's good to remember them as like they grant access to the Google Calendar. Then there's refresh tokens, because the issue is, okay, we go through this reminder app like nonsense, right? Like, and I, as a user, I just want to give the reminder app access to my Google Calendar. I don't care about all this stuff behind the scenes. As a developer, you do, but as a user, you don't. So the issue is that we don't want that access token to be too long-lived, because if we make it long-lived and someone steals it, then someone else, the thief, has access to that for a long period of time. So we want to keep it short-lived. But if we don't, if we keep it, it's for 5 minutes, or some short period of time, then the next time the reminder application goes to check my Google Calendar tomorrow, it's going to have to ask me to log in to Google again. So that is a horrible user experience, right? Like, so that is what refresh tokens are for. So refresh tokens are this extra piece of token that the reminder app can store for a longer period of time, and it can store it in a safer place, and it can ask Google when the access token has expired. It can say, "Hey Google, I have this refresh token. Can you give me a new access token?" And Google can say, "Well, no, because the person has deleted their Google account," or other things like that. Whereas, so it kind of has other options around that refresh token. But if everything goes well, then it just says, "Hey, yeah, great. Here's a new access token that's good for a certain period of time." The third type of token, which is called the ID token, which is built on top of, let me take a step back. There's a protocol called OIDC, which stands for OpenID Connect, which is built on top of OAuth 2, which is
Interesting.
yeah.
Because someone just asked, what is OIDC? And I was going to, when you're done, actually, that's it's nice you're already talking about it. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I'll give you your tip later, anonymous user who asked about OIDC. So that stands for OpenID Connect, which basically is a layer on top of OAuth 2, which takes care of authentication, and it generates an ID token at the end, and that ID token contains information about that's specifically designed for conveying information about the user and like who they are. The access token can convey information about the user, but it really is designed to be like just what permissions does the holder of this access token have? And it tends to be scoped to a user. That's a pretty common use case, but the ID token is really just about the user itself, right? Like who they are and things like that. So those are the three kinds of tokens that are pretty common in the world of OAuth.
Well, that's interesting. Thanks for the explanation. I definitely have seen them lots, but it's nice to hear like what they are. Great, and I'm sure Frank also got an answer to his question about OpenID Connect.
Awesome.
Yeah, great.
I did actually. I do have. If we want to like see a diagram of going through kind of the OAuth steps, I do have a diagram I can show you, or we can kind of head on to another conversation wherever you want to go.
Yeah, definitely we can see a diagram because after this I was going to ask you about FusionAuth.
Okay.
So yeah, let's do that.
Well, let me go ahead and pull up the right. Yeah, I'll share. I just want to pull up the right screen first. Here we are. Okay. All right. Share screen. Share screen.
Also, if anyone in chat has questions, feel free to leave it in comments. I'll ask. Yeah.
All right. Can you see this?
Yeah, I can.
Great. So one thing that we didn't actually talk about, which is probably worth mentioning, is that the process of getting the token in OAuth, in OAuth 2, is called a grant. And there's 5 or 6 grants that were defined in 2012. There have been additional grants that have been added over the years, but there are really only a couple of grants that you probably really care about as a developer. And the first is called the Authorization Code Grant. And this is what you want to use if the user is present, right? Like we talked about this. There's another grant called the Client Credentials Grant, which I'm not going to go through, which is useful if you have 2 machines talking to each other and they want to use OAuth to get a token. And that's much more like, you can imagine that reminder service. It might want to send you emails. And so internally, they might model those as 2 separate services. And the email service might need permissions to call the reminder service to get the reminders it's going to send emails about. But there's no user involved in that. It just happens via a cron job or something.
Okay.
So let's step through the authorization code grant. So the first thing that happens is there's a client. Actually, yeah, there's a client over here, which is a mobile app or a browser, or could be another server. Doesn't really matter. It's the thing that wants access to the valuable data, which in this case is a to-do API. in the example I talked you through, it was Google Calendar.
Okay.
And then we have the identity provider, which is, this is a little bit confusing. In the example I walked you through, it was Google as well, but it was a separate piece of Google. Here it's just any user management platform, but it could be Google if you want.
Okay, let's use Google then. Yeah.
So typically what happens is the client will be actually trying to access the resource, the to-do API in this case, and then it will get a redirect to the login page, right? And it'll say, the to-do API will say, hey, I can't give you access to this resource, this data, you need to log in first. And so the client will request the login page, and then they enter the username and password, they log in. The identity provider or the OAuth management server or Google's account system basically does a redirect with a code, and that code looks something like this. It's just a random string. It's one-time use, which is pretty important from a security perspective, and it needs to be URL safe. And then the client says, okay, I have this authorization code. It's going to now call into another piece of code, which this is sometimes done by a library. It sometimes is code that you have to write yourself, and I can show you it's a bunch of form posts, so it's not that hard. And actually, I have JavaScript code I can show you if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, let's go. Let's I don't know whether I can share. Did I share? I think I might have just shared this. Stop screen. Sorry.
Okay. It's fine.
I'm gonna put this right over here. Sorry. There we are.
Problem.
Share screen. I wonder if I can share that whole thing. That's interesting.
Usually I share the entire window.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me do that. Huh. It's not letting me share screens anymore. Oh, wait. That was settings. Share. Huh. Interesting. I wonder whether it's because oh, that's the issue. There it is. Okay. Share screen, share entire screen one. Okay, there we are. Thank you for bearing with me with my technical difficulties.
Yeah, it's fine.
So this right here, this OAuth callback, is what this application backend needs to do. And so it has a secret that's been previously configured that's associated with the OAuth system. It gets this one-time code from the client who is successfully authenticated against the OAuth system. And again, remember, our goal is to get this get a token that we can store on the client. So all we're doing is
Weirdly enough, is this Notepad or what?
This is Vim.
Vim,
So
okay.
yeah, I'm kind of I've had
you are one of those Vim lovers.
Yeah, unfortunately, I found Vim a long time ago, and I haven't moved on. Although I tried Visual Studio Code, and it was pretty nice. So yeah, so here's not line 93 is where we're getting the code that's coming in off the requests. And there's some other stuff, line 94, 95, that's like security stuff that's kind of most libraries will take care of that I'm not going to go into. Line 98 on, this is where we're basically posting to that OAuth server. And we're saying, okay, here's my client ID. Here's the secret that I have that you gave me previously. Here's the on line 101. Here's the code that we get from the request parameter. And then here's the grant type that we want, right, which is authorization code.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's the redirect URI. And the redirect URI is, again, something that's been configured on the OAuth server, and that is where the OAuth server should send. How do I put this? That is where the OAuth server is sending the client after the user has logged in.
Okay.
So that's where the code is basically handed. It's a URL in browser-based systems. In mobile apps, it tends to be it looks like a URL, but it can be an internal like state, basically.
I see. Okay.
So the reason why this is basically that redirect URI needs to be passed around all the time, because, and this is one of the reasons I think OAuth 2 is a great thing for developers to learn. There are some real security and authentication nerds who have spent a lot of time working on this protocol to make it very secure. And so basically the redirect URI needs to get provided by a couple of different pieces of this, because that all proves that they are who they say they are. Because bad people might want to change the redirect and have you go to a different place that they control, and you don't want that to happen, because the end result of this, remember, is a credential.
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. So on line 105, we're just posting using Axios. I don't even know if that's a so we're posting to a token endpoint, and this endpoint is defined by the OAuth server. That doesn't have to be the particular URL. And then we get back JSON, and it includes the access token. And in this particular case, this particular code has requested the ID token and the refresh token as well. And then we store those off, and then we can present those. So that basically, that's the whole, that's all you have to do in this app backend. But it has to be server side. It can't be client side, because the secret is basically like a little bit like a password for the application, and you can't have a secret in JavaScript or in a native app. You just can't have one.
Yeah, it's security-ish, where anyone can access that, and then they have access to.
Right.
Yeah. It's okay.
I mean, anyone can look at a JavaScript and decompile. Even if you obfuscate or encrypt it, at the end of the day, it's running in a browser, and so people can find secrets in there. So then after that kind of exchange has happened, this is what I just showed you, this post.
Yeah, okay.
Then we send the tokens, and you can keep the tokens server side, or you can send them down to the client. And then the whole point of this entire set of slides is you present the token to the protected resource, right? The To-Do API, the Google Calendar endpoint, and you get back the data that you want. That's the whole thing. So that's the authorization code grant, and the whole point is to go through all this. I don't want to say gyrations, because it's not really gyrations, but go through this to get that token and then store it off so you can get access.
Okay, makes sense. In this case, this is just how you typically do the authorization grant, but does this follow the same step if you want to use like a different grant, like the one you talked about, if you're communicating between two systems, for example? Is it like similar process to do it then?
This one's probably the most involved. The client credentials grant is a little simpler, and each grant is going to have its own set of steps. So they'll have the same kind of components, right? There'll always be this To-Do API, just to give your listeners or your watchers a bit of jargon. The To-Do API is called a resource server. It's a protected resource. It's holding protected resources, and the OAuth system is called an authorization server. So there'll always be an authorization server. There'll always be a resource server. Typically, there's a client, but the actual steps that you go through are going to be different for each grant.
Okay, makes sense. Great. You shared a lot. I'll definitely say that. I think now, like for you to, even though you didn't want to, I mean, it's fine. Talk a bit more about FusionAuth, right? Because it's also like another path for people watching to learn
Sure.
how to use. Yeah. So if you like to talk briefly about that, it's fine.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. So FusionAuth is a authorization server. Basically, it fulfills this role in this OAuth flow or those OAuth grant, and has a bit more functionality than that. And the main thing that we do is try to take authentication, authorization, user management off of developers' plates. So we have we're super developer friendly. We have lots of documentation. We're API first. We can deploy on Windows, Mac, Linux, Docker, and the last thing I'd say is that we have multiple editions. We have a free edition that is 100% free for as many users as you want. If you run it yourself, if you just spin up an EC2 instance or Docker instance and run it yourself. We also have paid editions where we host it for you, or some things we have additional extra features, and those we charge for. So that's kind of our business model. Is free. I just want to be super clear for your viewers that it's not open source, but it is free.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Sounds good then.
Thanks.
Thank you. One other bit I'd like for us to. Oh, we have one more question. What is? I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. SAML. SAML.
Yep. So SAML is another one of those protocols that I mentioned kind of was started in the 2000s, and it was codified, I think, in 2005, but it is still in use nowadays. And it is less used to access protected resources like this OAuth system is used to do so, and it's more used for single sign-on. It is actually FusionAuth supports it as well, and there's a fair amount of other support for it. But it's more used to say, okay, I'm on application A. I want to be able to log in to application B. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I have application A, I have application B, I have an identity server, I have like something like FusionAuth, although again there are other options out there. I want to be able to log into application A and application B transparently. So obviously the first time I visit application A, I have to log in. It's going to bounce me to the identity server, and then that identity server is going to pass me back to application A, right? And I do my application A stuff. Now I go to application B. Application B can bounce me to the identity server, and then that identity server can say, oh, I already know you because you logged in for application A, and I've been configured in such a way. Then it bounces back to application B without me actually having to re-authenticate. So that's the main purpose of SAML.
Oh, makes sense. I'm just here thinking of if I've seen that in real life, like in trying to log in, and then I don't think I have. Maybe then it means that most people don't use this integration.
I mean, so an example that isn't using SAML, as far as I know, but you probably have used, is Google Calendar and Gmail, right? Like they're on totally different systems, different domains. But once you log into Gmail, you can log into Google Calendar. And again, I don't know if that's an example of single sign-on. I don't know if Google's using SAML under the covers, but that's the kind of thing that SAML will let you do.
Okay. Makes sense. Great. I hope that answered your question, Frank. Moving on, this is non-identity auth related, but I also wanted to bring it up because I find that it's very interesting. Letter to a new developer, right? This is also something you've been working on, obviously, for a long time, and you're also writing a book, or you've written it. I'm not sure, but I saw it and I just said I want to definitely talk about this. First, what's how did that come about, and what is it? Yeah.
Sure. So how it started was I wrote a book in 2012, I want to say. about it's a technology called Cordova, which used to be called
I knew it.
you've used it. Okay. So I wrote this book about it, and it was 45 pages long. It was an ebook and a ton of work, and I learned a ton. And as soon as I got it published, um, we stopped using the technology at work, and then about 2 months later, it was out of date. And so I said, I want to. I first of all, I never want to write another book again. That's what I was thinking. And then I said, if I ever did, I wouldn't want it to be something that was technology based. It'd be technology adjacent, but not based, because
Mm,
technology books just go. Unless you're talking about like Vim, they go out of
yeah.
they go out of date so quick. So
Yeah.
um, so it's about 6 years later, I started to think, well, gosh, I'd really like to write another book, but I want to I definitely want to make sure it's not technology based, but what can I do that's helpful? And at the time, I was an engineering manager and I was interviewing a lot of new devs. And I said, well, I'm going to start this blog. And if I do this blog for a while and I'm passionate about it, then I will see if I can turn that into a book. And so that's where I pulled up this blog that's on the screen. I've been doing this since about 2018, and 2020, early 2020, was it early 2020? Yeah, I think it was 2019. I
Mm,
reached out to I met a publisher representative at a conference, chatted with them briefly, and then in early 2020, I started to get serious about it. And a, a large part of the book is pulling blog posts from this website and like refining them, editing them, making them longer, making them better. But about 90% of the topics are covered by the website, and then about 10% was new stuff. And it's been a super great experience for me. I hope it's helped a lot of people. I've had people tell me it's helped them. And the other thing that's been really fun is I actually have been able to get guest posts. Um,
nice.
so people that have written interesting things, like this is one from Steven, and there's been other ones from kind of just a wide variety of folks. They have different perspectives than I do, right? Like I have a certain perspective when I started development, how my progression has gone. Other
Hmm.
people have totally different experiences, and so it's really nice
Yeah.
to have them come in and give advice.
Oh, this is really cool. Like, I mean, I like the tech stuff, but I also like, where there is knowledge packed from actual engineers working in the field that can just say, hey, this is what I experienced, right? This can help you. And this resource is out there for free, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
it's really nice. I wanted to bring it up, and great work, because
Thank
I
you.
went through your blog and I see you've been writing since 2013. Is it 2013 or 2008? That's a long time, right? And super consistent. So
Thank you. So you looked at my personal blog? Is that what the one you're
yeah,
talking about?
yeah, the
Yeah.
one I saw, yeah, I saw that, and then I saw this one. I'm like, oh, definitely bringing this up because it's cool. So if you're here and you're a developer, regardless of the level, because I feel like even if you're not a new developer, you can still pick up useful stuff from all of this, right? So definitely check it out.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, over here, this kind of start here. These are the most popular ones, and I feel like I've definitely learned a ton from just reading, especially the guest posts. I'll be like, oh wow, I never thought about that. Like this one, I'll always be journaling, is a
Mm,
great post where he talks about like just the mechanics of how he journals to like integrate his learning over time. And he goes way. I actually know Brooke personally, and he goes, um, he's way more in depth than I would be. But it's just a real interesting. Even if you never do a journaling like this, like just to like read it and say, oh wow, this is what pieces of this can I take and incorporate into my developer journey.
mhm. Yeah, I honestly find this kind of writing helpful. First, not just for yourself, because of course I like the concept of writing for your future self, right? But it's also helpful for others because, like, I find this blog and I read it and I learn something and I add it to my own skill sets. It's helpful for me. So it's really, I don't know, I keep saying it's really nice. I love it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for giving me the chance to highlight it. I appreciate that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, people in chat also agree with me. So they said, super interesting, like it as well. You all should check it out. Yeah, I think those are the things that I wanted to cover. But if you have any other thing, definitely we have like 15 minutes left, but it's not compulsory for us to go over the entire hour. So if you want to call it a wrap, I'm fine. If you want to talk about something else, I'm also down for that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. The only other thing, let me go through the refresh token
Okay.
flow, and then I think we can call it. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good.
Great. I think it's here. So, oh yeah, here it is. Okay, so here we have our same kind of application, and we have a client that has refresh tokens and an access token, which in this case is a JSON web token. And I can talk about JSON web tokens actually if you want,
Yeah.
but we don't have to.
Yeah.
So
High
if
level. Yeah.
sure, yeah, okay. Let's take a quick detour to high level JSON web tokens. So the JSON web tokens are basically, we talked about OAuth is all about getting that token, right? That credential that is time bound, and the OAuth specification doesn't say anything about the token other than it needs to be produced and it should be kind of relatively unique, right? Because you obviously don't want tokens to be reused or anything like that. But it doesn't say anything about the format, anything. JSON Web Tokens are a kind of token that actually have been, I think they were codified in 2017, but they're a way to generate a token that is you can verify that it came from the OAuth system without actually talking to the OAuth system through the magic of cryptography, and it's URL safe. So, and it contains JSON, which can contain a bunch of rich information, right? So it can contain a lot more data about the person or about the thing that's holding the access token than than a the token that doesn't contain any that's not a JSON web token could. So
Yeah.
that's why a lot of people use them.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's an overview of JSON web tokens. I have a talk. I can actually I've recorded a talk a couple of times and given it to some meetup groups that goes into more detail. But let's talk about refresh tokens.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, sure.
so the client is basically just making requests against these protected resources, right? Happy as a clam, just making requests, and then eventually the token times out, right? It expires because that's what tokens do. They are time bound, and so the do API says, hey, actually, I was giving you back data, but now I'm going to send you back a 401 or a 403, right? This is a request you're no longer authorized for. And then the client can present the refresh token to the OAuth system, and the OAuth system can know if the client, if the user is logged out or if there's been suspicious activity or something like that, and can determine whether or not to grant a new access token, and it may. And so then it grants a new access token, and the new token gets presented to the protected resource, and you get your data back. And the whole point, as I mentioned earlier, is that the user didn't have to relog in. So
Yeah.
cool. That's the
Cool.
refresh token. So thank you very much for having me. I really, really appreciate the chance to talk.
This was very insightful learning. I learned a lot, and I'm sure people also did learn about authentication, OAuth in general, and all of that. So super happy to have you on the stream. I'm going to, for folks that are here, I'm going to leave links in the description because after this stream, the video goes live. So if you want to check out all the links, I'll have it there for you. Cool.
Awesome.
All right. This is a wrap for today's stream. Thank you for joining, Dan. Again, it's a pleasure having you on the stream. And yeah, see you all next week. Cool.
Bye.
Bye.